The sun was just beginning to rise over the dusty hills that surrounded the small frontier town of Red Hollow. A soft wind carried the smell of dry grass and earth, and the quiet was broken only by the distant lowing of cattle and the occasional clatter of a wagon rolling along the uneven dirt road. Into this quiet town came a young woman named Amara. She walked with careful steps, her boots sinking slightly into the soft dust, her coat wrapped tightly around her to keep out the morning chill. Her dark hair blew in the wind, and her eyes, alert and cautious, scanned the small wooden buildings that made up Red Hollow. She was not a stranger to traveling alone, but this town felt different. There was a tension in the air that made her heart beat faster than usual. Amara had heard about Red Hollow long before she arrived. Stories of suspicion and prejudice reached her ears as she journeyed across the plains. She knew that people in small towns like this one often looked at outsiders with wariness. But she also knew that she could not stop moving. She had nowhere else to go, and she carried with her not just her belongings, but a hope that somewhere she might find a place where she belonged. Her past had been difficult. Born as a half-blood, a term whispered like a curse in many towns, she had always lived between worlds. Her mother was from a lineage that had deep roots in the local region, while her father came from a distant land with different customs and language. This mixture had made her a target for fear and mistrust throughout her life. People did not understand her, and that lack of understanding often turned into cruelty. As she walked into the main street of Red Hollow, she noticed the townspeople staring from the wooden sidewalks. Some looked at her with open suspicion, while others whispered behind their hands. The children, less bound by prejudice, peeked from behind their parents' skirts, curious about this newcomer. Amara held her head high, refusing to let their stares make her shrink away. She knew that showing fear could make them bolder in their judgment. She approached the general store first, hoping to find a few supplies and perhaps some guidance about where she might rest. The bell above the door jingled softly as she stepped inside. The store was small, filled with the smells of dried goods, leather, and a faint trace of smoke from the fireplace at the back. Behind the counter stood a man with a weathered face, lines etched deep from years under the sun. He looked at Amara for a long moment, his eyes narrowing slightly as if measuring her intentions. "Can I help you?" he asked cautiously. Amara smiled gently, hoping to soften his suspicion. "I am just looking for some bread and a little advice," she said. Her voice was calm but firm. "I have just arrived in town and do not know anyone here." The man hesitated but nodded, pointing to the shelves where bread and basic supplies were kept. He said nothing more, and she sensed the weight of unspoken questions about who she was and where she came from. After paying for her goods, Amara stepped back into the street. The sunlight had grown stronger, casting long shadows of the buildings across the dirt road. She noticed a few men leaning against the saloon, watching her with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. One of them spat to the side and muttered something under his breath. She could not hear clearly, but she felt the sting of their judgment. Amara knew that in towns like these, the past often followed people like her, even if they had done nothing wrong. She needed to find a place to rest, somewhere safe, where she could gather her strength before continuing her journey. As she moved further into the town, she saw a small, abandoned cabin on the edge of the main road. The wooden boards were weathered and cracked, but it offered some protection from the wind and the prying eyes of the townspeople. She approached carefully, knocking on the door just in case someone lived inside. There was no answer. Taking a deep breath, she decided to step inside. The air was stale, but she could see the faint traces of previous inhabitants. A small bed frame, a wooden table, and a broken chair. It was not much, but it would do for now. Amara set down her bundle and took a moment to rest, sitting on the edge of the bed. As she sat there, her mind wandered to the life she had left behind. She remembered the small village where her mother had lived, the gentle rivers, and the mountains that touched the clouds. But that life had not been kind to her either. Her difference had always set her apart, and even among people who were meant to love her, she had faced whispers and pointed fingers. That experience had taught her resilience, but it had also made her wary. She had learned to read people quickly, to sense fear, suspicion, and sometimes kindness in the subtlest gestures. And now, in Red Hollow, she needed every bit of that skill. Later in the day, Amara ventured back into the town, hoping to find someone who might offer guidance or work. She passed the blacksmith's forge, the rhythmic sound of hammer striking metal echoing through the street. Sparks flew with each strike, glinting in the sunlight. The blacksmith glanced at her, wiping sweat from his brow. "Looking for work?" he asked gruffly. Amara shook her head. "Not yet," she replied. "Just trying to find a safe place to stay and understand this town a little better." He nodded slightly, returning to his work, but she could sense that he did not entirely trust her. By evening, the town had grown quieter. The wind carried the scent of smoke from the chimneys, and the sky turned shades of orange and pink. Amara returned to the cabin, feeling tired but determined. She knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges. People here might be wary, even hostile, but she had faced fear and judgment before. Her heart was strong, and she refused to let prejudice define her. She built a small fire in the corner of the cabin, the flames casting flickering shadows on the walls. As she sat by the fire, she thought about her journey. She had traveled far, leaving behind places where she was not accepted. Now, she hoped that Red Hollow might offer something different, even if only a chance to prove who she truly was. As night fell, the wind whispered through the cracks in the wooden cabin. Amara lay down on the bed, her eyes reflecting the glow of the dying fire. She thought about the people she had passed today, the curious stares, the cautious words, and the cold shoulders. She wondered who, if anyone, might see her for what she truly was, and not just for the label that others had placed upon her. Sleep came slowly, but it came. Tomorrow, she would continue her journey in Red Hollow, ready to face the unknown with courage and determination. She might be seen as a stranger, a half-blood, someone who did not belong, but she knew in her heart that she had the strength to survive, to endure, and perhaps to find a place she could call home. The morning in Red Hollow broke with a soft pink light spilling over the dusty streets. Amara woke in the small cabin, her mind restless from the events of the previous day. Though she had found a place to rest, she could not ignore the uneasy feeling in her chest. Something in the town had not yet welcomed her presence. The stares, the whispers, the cautious avoidance. All of it reminded her that she was different in a place where difference was feared. But she reminded herself that she had survived difficult moments before. She had faced judgment and prejudice in other towns, and she had endured. Today, she would face Red Hollow with the same courage that had carried her this far. As she stepped outside, the streets were beginning to come alive. Merchants opened their shops, the blacksmith's hammer rang against metal, and the scent of fresh bread drifted from the general store. Amara moved carefully, trying not to draw too much attention to herself, though she knew it was impossible. The townspeople's eyes followed her, some curious, some wary. She could feel their judgment like invisible hands pressing on her shoulders. Still, she held her head high and kept walking, hoping to find someone who might help her understand the town or at least tolerate her presence. She had barely walked a few steps when she noticed a commotion near the town square. A small crowd had gathered, and voices rose in anger and fear. Amara approached cautiously, staying at the edge of the group. From where she stood, she could hear bits of the conversation. snippets of accusations and angry murmurs. A young boy had claimed that someone had stolen food from his family's store, and the townspeople were eager to find a culprit. In small towns like Red Hollow, suspicion could spread quickly, and fear often turned into anger. Before long, the crowd's attention turned toward Amara. She had done nothing wrong, but in the eyes of the frightened townspeople, her difference made her a convenient target. "She's a half-blood," someone shouted. "She doesn't belong here." Others nodded, some murmuring their agreement, some glancing nervously at their neighbors. Amara's heart pounded. She had expected wariness, perhaps avoidance, but not open hostility so quickly. She tried to speak, to explain that she had no part in any theft, but the crowd's anger grew louder, drowning out her words. A man stepped forward from the center of the mob, his face red with anger. "Outsider or not, someone has to pay," he shouted. "And it's her! Look at her! She's not like us! She's different!" Amara's mind raced. She realized that arguing would not help. The townspeople were no longer seeking truth. They were seeking someone to punish. Fear had replaced reason, and prejudice had replaced justice. Her survival instincts kicked in. She needed help. But she also needed to stay calm. She took a deep breath and stood her ground, refusing to show panic. As the mob grew restless, they began dragging her toward the large oak tree at the edge of the town square. It was a place used for public punishments, a grim reminder to anyone who dared to step out of line. Amara's legs trembled slightly, but she did not resist. She knew that struggling might provoke the crowd further. She looked around desperately, hoping for a sign of kindness, someone who might intervene. But the faces around her were hardened with fear and anger. The town had turned against her, not because she had done anything wrong, but because she was different, because she did not fit their narrow idea of who belonged. Once at the tree, the crowd prepared a rope. Amara's eyes widened as she realized the severity of the situation. Her heart pounded, and a cold sweat ran down her back. She tried again to speak, her voice trembling but firm. "Please, I am not your enemy," she said. "I have done nothing wrong. I only wish to live in peace." But the mob ignored her words. Fear had blinded them, and their judgment was fueled by old prejudices and rumors. They did not see a young woman frightened and alone. They saw a symbol of difference, someone to punish for their own fears. As they placed the rope around her, Amara's mind raced through memories of her past. She remembered her mother's gentle hands, the stories told at night to comfort her, and the lessons of resilience her father had taught her. She remembered the many times she had faced cruelty, prejudice, and misunderstanding, and how she had survived each trial. Now, in Red Hollow, she needed that same strength. She focused on breathing, slowing her racing heart, trying to keep her mind clear. Panic might lead to mistakes. Clarity might save her life. The mob's leader, a tall man with a stern face, began to speak to the gathered townspeople, justifying their actions. "We cannot allow someone like her to live among us," he said. "She is not one of us. She is a half-blood. If we let her stay, who knows what trouble she might bring." The crowd murmured in agreement. Fear had transformed into justification, and prejudice had been cloaked as righteousness. Amara listened carefully, noting their words, their gestures, the tight grip some had on sticks and tools. She realized that they truly believed they were acting for the good of the town. It made their cruelty all the more dangerous. As the noose was tightened around her neck, Amara felt a strange mixture of fear and calm. She thought of everything that had brought her to this moment, the long journey across the plains, the distrust she had faced in every town, the hope that somewhere she might find safety. And now she realized that hope was not gone. Somewhere in Red Hollow, there might be someone who would see her not as a threat, not as a symbol of difference, but as a human being deserving of compassion. Her thoughts focused on survival, on the possibility of being rescued, on the belief that courage could shine even in the darkest moment. The crowd grew restless, their voices rising in anticipation. They were ready to act, convinced that their justice was just. Some shouted encouragement to the leader, others muttered doubts, but none were willing to challenge the mob outright. Amara's eyes scanned the crowd desperately, searching for someone who might intervene. She needed a person of courage, someone who could stand against the tide of fear and prejudice. In that moment, she remembered the stories she had heard about a rancher who lived on the outskirts of town. Elias, a man known for his fairness and wisdom, had earned the respect of many. She dared to hope that he might appear, that he might recognize her humanity before it was too late. Minutes stretched like hours as the crowd prepared to act. The tension was thick, almost suffocating. Amara's mind raced with memories of past injustices, of moments when she had been judged for who she was rather than for what she had done. But now, unlike before, she could sense the possibility of rescue. She could not see him yet, but she believed that someone like Elias would not stand by while injustice was carried out. Her heart, though terrified, held a fragile thread of hope. Then, from the edge of the square, a figure appeared. Elias, the rancher, walked steadily toward the crowd, his eyes fixed on Amara. The townspeople murmured, some stepping back, some frowning at his boldness. Elias did not shout or threaten. He simply approached with calm authority. His presence alone seemed to command attention. Amara's heart leaped with relief. The fear that had gripped her was replaced by a renewed sense of courage. She would not be alone in facing this moment. Elias raised his hand, signaling for silence. "Stop," he said, his voice firm but calm. "She belongs here as much as any of you. Do not let fear and prejudice decide who lives and who dies." The crowd hesitated, caught off guard by his words. Some looked at him in disbelief. Others lowered their heads, unsure how to respond. Amara felt the rope around her neck loosen slightly as one of the men stepped back. Elias had arrived just in time, and his courage offered a chance for survival. Even as the mob wavered, Amara's heart was still pounding, her mind still alert to danger. She knew that this moment was precarious, that the people of Red Hollow could easily turn again if challenged. But for now, Elias's presence gave her hope. She realized that even in the face of prejudice and anger, there were people willing to stand up for justice. And that thought, fragile but powerful, filled her with determination to survive, to endure, and to continue her journey, no matter what challenges lay ahead. The wind rustled through the dusty streets of Red Hollow, carrying the scent of baked bread, leather, and earth. The crowd had gathered in the town square, tension thick in the air. Amara's heart was pounding, every beat echoing the fear that had taken hold of her moments ago. She had felt the rope tighten around her neck, the cold bite of death brushing against her, and yet she had also felt a fragile spark of hope when she had seen Elias approaching. Now, with him standing before the mob, her heart dared to believe that she might survive this nightmare. Elias did not rush or shout. He walked steadily through the crowd, his boots kicking up small puffs of dust. His eyes were calm but firm, and his gaze did not waver from Amara even for a moment. The townspeople looked at him, some with suspicion, others with surprise, and a few with fear. They had grown accustomed to their own judgments, their anger guiding their actions without question. But Elias was different. His presence demanded attention. He did not appear as one seeking confrontation. He appeared as one seeking justice. "Enough," he said, his voice carrying over the murmurs of the crowd. "You are about to commit an injustice. She is not your enemy. She is not a threat. She is a human being, and she belongs here as much as any of you." The words were calm, yet filled with authority. For a moment, the town seemed to hold its breath. Some of the men whispered to each other, unsure of how to react. The crowd had been ready to act, fueled by fear and prejudice, but Elias's words introduced doubt. The certainty of their judgment wavered, even if only slightly. Amara's eyes filled with tears, not from fear this time, but from relief. She could hardly believe that someone had come to stand for her. Elias had not only rescued her from the immediate danger, but had also given her something she had longed for all her life: validation, acknowledgement of her humanity. She had always known she was different, and she had faced judgment for it countless times. But in this moment, she saw that there were people willing to recognize her for who she truly was. The mob leader, a man with a face hardened by years of suspicion and anger, stepped forward. His voice was loud, filled with indignation. "And who are you to tell us what is right?" he shouted. "She is a half-blood. She does not belong here. You cannot change that." Elias did not flinch. He stepped closer to the rope, to the noose that still hung ominously, and met the leader's gaze evenly. "It is not for you to decide who belongs and who does not," he said quietly but firmly. "Justice is not blind to fear. It is blind to prejudice, and this young woman has done nothing to deserve this treatment." His words were steady, and for the first time, some in the crowd began to lower their voices, unsure of themselves. Amara could barely speak, but she managed to whisper, "Thank you." Her voice was trembling, and Elias nodded at her without breaking his gaze from the crowd. He reached the rope, his hand steady, and without hesitation, he drew his knife and cut through it. The tension in the air broke suddenly as the rope fell to the ground. Amara gasped, her body trembling as she realized that the threat of death had been removed. She collapsed to her knees for a moment, not from weakness, but from overwhelming relief. Elias extended a hand to her, and she took it, rising to her feet with his support. The townspeople watched in stunned silence. Some muttered among themselves, their voices full of uncertainty. Others looked ashamed, the reality of their actions settling in like a weight upon their shoulders. The leader of the mob clenched his fists, struggling with the shame he refused to acknowledge. Elias turned toward the crowd, his voice carrying across the square. "This young woman is not your enemy. She is a member of this town now. Treat her with respect, or face the consequences of your own actions." The statement was firm, unwavering, and it left no room for argument. Amara felt her heart lift. For the first time in her life, someone had not only defended her, but had also demanded that others see her as an equal. She felt a deep sense of gratitude toward Elias, but also a rising hope that Red Hollow could become a place where she might belong. The fear that had gripped her moments ago was replaced by a cautious optimism. She knew that not everyone in the town would accept her immediately, but she had seen that courage and fairness could create change, even in the most rigid hearts. Elias turned to Amara, his eyes softening. "Are you all right?" he asked. His concern was genuine, not merely for appearances. Amara nodded, her voice caught in her throat. I think so," she managed to say. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. The rope that had threatened her life lay on the ground as a symbol of the cruelty she had narrowly escaped. But it was also a reminder of the courage that had saved her. Elias's bravery had created a turning point, not just for her, but for the entire town. The mob began to disperse slowly, some glancing at Elias with newfound respect, others with lingering suspicion. The tension in the air eased, but the lesson of the day would linger long after the dust settled. Amara watched as Elias guided her away from the square toward the outskirts of the town where his ranch lay. The journey was quiet at first, the only sound the soft crunch of boots on dirt. Amara could hardly believe that just moments ago she had been facing death. Now she was walking alongside the very man who had saved her life, feeling a fragile sense of hope for the future. As they walked, Elias spoke gently. "You are safe now," he said. "And you will be safe as long as you are here. Red Hollow may not accept you all at once, but there are people here who value fairness and justice. That includes you." Amara listened intently, absorbing his words. For so long she had carried the weight of judgment, the burden of being seen as different. Elias's words felt like a balm, softening the years of pain and fear she had endured. She began to imagine a life in Red Hollow where she could belong, where her differences would not be a curse, but a part of who she was. When they reached the ranch, Amara was struck by its beauty. The wide-open fields stretched beyond sight, dotted with grazing cattle and framed by distant hills. The smell of hay, leather, and earth filled the air. It was a place of calm and order, a stark contrast to the chaos of the town square. Elias led her to a small cabin on the ranch, similar in size to her temporary home in town, but well-kept and warm. "This will be your place for now," he said. "Rest, recover, and know that you are welcome here." Amara felt tears prick at her eyes. For the first time in her life, she felt a sense of belonging, even if it was only beginning to take root. That evening, as the sun set over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Amara sat on the porch of the cabin, reflecting on the events of the day. She thought about the mob, their fear and prejudice, and the danger she had faced. She thought about Elias, his courage, and the way he had stood up for what was right. And she thought about herself, the resilience that had carried her this far, and the hope that now glimmered in her heart. She knew that her journey in Red Hollow was only beginning, that challenges would still come, but she also knew that she had a protector and an ally, someone who saw her worth. As night fell, the ranch was calm. The wind whispered through the fields, carrying the scent of grass and earth. Amara lay down in her small cabin, feeling a sense of peace she had not known in years. She had survived, and she had been saved not just by chance, but by the courage of a man who refused to let fear dictate actions. She closed her eyes, letting the calm wash over her, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges, but also new opportunities. She had been judged, threatened, and almost lost her life, but she had also been shown that kindness and courage could prevail. Amara drifted into sleep with the hope that the days ahead would be better. She dreamed of wide-open fields, of a life where she could belong, of a town that might one day see her as she truly was. She dreamed of a future where fear and prejudice would no longer rule, and where courage and compassion would guide the hearts of those around her. And as she slept, the ranch stood quiet and strong, a safe haven in a world that had often been cruel, a place where she had been given a second chance, and a chance to build a life worth living. The days following Amara's rescue were filled with a mixture of relief, exhaustion, and cautious hope. Life on Elias's ranch was quiet and steady, a stark contrast to the chaos of the town square. The fields stretched endlessly, dotted with grazing cattle, and the hills in the distance seemed to promise a new beginning. For Amara, each day was a chance to recover not just from the physical exhaustion of her ordeal, but from the deep emotional scars left by fear, prejudice, and rejection. The rope around her neck had been cut, but the memories lingered, reminding her that safety and trust were precious and fragile. Elias guided her gently through the first days, showing her the ways of the ranch. He was patient and kind, never demanding more than she could give, and always encouraging her to ask questions. Amara learned to feed the animals, to mend fences, and to help with the daily chores. At first, her movements were awkward, and her hands were sore from unfamiliar tasks. But she discovered a quiet strength within herself, the same resilience that had carried her through years of struggle. She realized that her differences, which had once made her a target, now allowed her to approach tasks with creativity and care. Her attentiveness and thoughtfulness impressed Elias, who often smiled quietly as he observed her learning quickly and working diligently. As Amara gained confidence in her skills, she also began to feel a growing connection to the land itself. The early mornings were filled with the soft calls of birds, the rustle of grass, and the gentle hum of insects. She found solace in these moments, feeling a sense of peace she had never known in crowded towns or harsh cities. The land did not judge her. It accepted her as she was, and in that acceptance, she began to heal. Each day, she felt her fear and anxiety lessen, replaced by a quiet determination to live fully, to embrace the life she had been given, and to prove, to herself and others, that she belonged. Despite the calm of the ranch, Amara knew that the town itself would take longer to accept her. She had seen the whispers and the suspicion in the eyes of the townspeople. Yet she noticed small signs of change. People who had once avoided her now greeted her cautiously. Children, who had been curious but shy, began to smile and wave as she passed by. Even some adults started to acknowledge her presence without fear or hostility. Amara understood that trust and acceptance could not be forced. They had to be earned. And she was willing to be patient, to show the town through her actions and character that she was not a threat, but a friend and neighbor. One afternoon, Elias suggested that she accompany him into town to deliver supplies to the general store. Amara felt a flutter of nerves, but agreed. The streets of Red Hollow were busier than usual, filled with merchants, shoppers, and townspeople going about their day. As they walked, Amara noticed a few familiar faces, people who had been part of the mob days before, watching her from a distance. She held her head high, reminding herself that she had survived and that she had courage. Elias walked beside her, his presence a quiet shield, but he also allowed her to take small steps on her own, encouraging her independence and confidence. At the general store, Amara helped Elias carry sacks of grain and other goods. The storekeeper, a man who had once eyed her with suspicion, now greeted her with a nod. "Good to see you," he said quietly, almost shyly. Amara smiled warmly, feeling a small victory in this simple acknowledgement. She realized that trust and respect were built through small, consistent actions. Each act of kindness, each display of diligence and honesty, was slowly reshaping the town's perception of her. She began to see that acceptance was not instant, but it was possible, and that her perseverance and integrity could pave the way. In the evenings, Amara would sit on the porch of her cabin, reflecting on the day's events. The ranch was quiet, the air filled with the gentle sounds of nature. She thought about her journey, from the days of fear and judgment in her past to the moments of hope and safety she now experienced. She remembered the faces of the townspeople, some still wary, some beginning to soften, and she understood that change took time. But she also knew that she could be part of that change, that her presence and actions could inspire others to reconsider their prejudices and fears. One day, as Amara was tending to the animals, a young girl from the town approached. She was hesitant, clutching a small basket of flowers. I wanted to give you these," the girl said softly, holding out the flowers. Amara knelt to accept them, smiling warmly. "Thank you," she said gently. "That is very kind of you." The girl's eyes brightened, and she ran back toward the town, a small but meaningful bridge between Amara and the people around her. Moments like these, small as they seemed, carried immense significance. They reminded Amara that acceptance could grow in unexpected ways, and that kindness could ripple outward, changing hearts slowly but surely. Amara also began to form a bond with Elias that went beyond gratitude. He became a mentor, a guide, and a steadfast friend. Through his wisdom, patience, and unwavering belief in justice and compassion, he helped Amara navigate not only the work of the ranch, but the complexities of human relationships. He taught her that courage was not only about facing immediate danger, but also about living with integrity, speaking truth, and standing up for what was right, even when it was difficult. Amara absorbed these lessons, feeling herself grow stronger and more confident with each passing day. As the weeks passed, Amara's reputation in the town slowly shifted. She was no longer just the half-blood whom people feared. She was becoming a young woman known for her kindness, her courage, and her willingness to help others. She assisted neighbors with chores, offered guidance to children learning tasks on the farm, and shared her knowledge of herbs and remedies with those who needed them. Her actions spoke louder than words, and gradually, the townspeople began to see her true character. They began to respect her, not because they were forced to, but because they could not deny the goodness they saw in her. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Amara walked to the edge of the ranch to watch the cattle settle for the night. She thought about how far she had come, from the frightened young woman facing death to someone who had found safety, purpose, and respect. She reflected on the lessons she had learned: courage, resilience, patience, and the importance of kindness. And she realized that her journey was not only about survival, it was about growth, about building a life where she could belong and make a positive impact. Amara knew that challenges would continue to come. Not everyone in Red Hollow would accept her immediately, and there would be moments of doubt, fear, or misunderstanding. But she also knew that she had the strength to face these challenges. She had survived the worst, and she had been shown that there were people willing to stand for justice and kindness. That knowledge gave her courage, and that courage became a foundation upon which she could build her life. As night fell and stars twinkled overhead, Amara returned to her cabin. The fire she lit in the evening cast a warm glow, illuminating the simple comforts of her room. She took a deep breath, feeling gratitude for the safety, guidance, and hope she had been given. She thought about the future, about the possibility of being fully accepted by the town, and about the life she could build on this land. And she knew that with patience, kindness, and perseverance, she could achieve it. Amara lay down, letting her mind wander through the memories of her journey and the lessons she had learned. She thought about Elias's courage, the young girl's small act of kindness, and the growing respect of the townspeople. She realized that belonging was not something given. It was something earned, nurtured through trust, understanding, and consistent action. And she felt a deep sense of purpose, a belief that she could help create a community in Red Hollow where fear and prejudice no longer dictated the lives of its people. As sleep overtook her, Amara dreamed not of fear or danger, but of hope and possibility. She dreamed of the ranch, the town, and the people she would come to know and help. She dreamed of a future where she could live freely, contribute meaningfully, and be recognized not for the label of her birth, but for the strength, courage, and kindness she carried within her. And in those dreams, she felt a sense of belonging, the first true sense of home she had ever known. Years passed in Red Hollow, and with each passing season, Amara's presence in the town became stronger, steadier, and more deeply felt. The young woman who had once arrived as a stranger, judged and feared for being different, was no longer merely a newcomer. She had become a valued member of the community. Time had softened the hearts of many townspeople, while her consistent courage, kindness, and hard work had earned the respect of almost everyone. Amara herself had changed as well, growing more confident, self-assured, and at peace with her identity. She no longer carried the same fear she had felt upon first entering Red Hollow, though she remembered it well enough to know the value of compassion and courage. Her days were filled with a rhythm of work, learning, and helping others. She continued her life on Elias's ranch, tending to the animals, maintaining the fences, and helping with harvests. But her influence extended beyond the boundaries of the ranch. Townspeople often came to her for advice, whether it was about planting crops, caring for animals, or solving personal problems. Amara's gentle wisdom and calm presence made her a natural confidant, and people began to see her not as an outsider, but as a trusted and reliable friend. Even those who had once scowled or whispered behind her back now nodded politely when they passed, some even stopping to greet her warmly. Amara also formed meaningful relationships with children in the town. They were drawn to her patience, her gentle humor, and the way she treated everyone equally. She taught them how to care for the animals, how to read the signs of the land, and sometimes even simple lessons about courage and kindness. The children, in turn, became little ambassadors of her goodwill, often sharing stories about her helpfulness and bravery with their families. Through these small but significant interactions, Amara slowly changed the perception of the entire community. She was no longer a symbol of difference to fear. She was a symbol of resilience and compassion to admire. Her bond with Elias grew even deeper over the years. What had started as a relationship of mentor and student, protector and rescued, transformed into a friendship rooted in mutual respect and understanding. Elias valued her courage and intelligence, and Amara admired his wisdom and unwavering moral compass. Together they worked on the ranch, planning improvements, teaching others, and tending to the needs of the land. Their partnership became a model for the town, showing that trust, cooperation, and empathy could create strength in both personal and communal life. Despite all the progress, Amara remained mindful of the past. She remembered the fear, the judgment, and the mob that had once sought to harm her. Those memories were not burdens, but lessons. They reminded her of the importance of patience, courage, and standing up for others. She made it a point to help newcomers to Red Hollow, especially those who felt different or unwelcome. She offered them advice, guidance, and a friendly face, ensuring that they would not face the same isolation and prejudice that she had endured. In doing so, Amara became not only a respected figure in the town, but also a beacon of hope and inclusion. The townspeople gradually acknowledged her value more openly. They invited her to community gatherings, sought her opinion in town meetings, and celebrated her contributions. Even those who had been part of the mob now spoke respectfully to her, some even apologizing quietly for their past actions. Amara accepted their gestures with grace, understanding that forgiveness and patience were as powerful as courage and strength. She knew that change took time, and that many people had only begun to confront their own biases and fears. Her presence, unwavering and consistent, helped guide the town toward greater understanding. One spring morning, the town faced a severe challenge. Heavy rains had caused the river to overflow, threatening homes and crops. Amara sprang into action, helping to organize the townspeople, reinforcing riverbanks and ensuring that animals and families were safe. Her quick thinking and calm leadership prevented damage that could have been catastrophic. The townspeople witnessed her bravery and decisiveness firsthand, and their admiration for her deepened. It was a moment that symbolized not only her personal growth, but also the growing trust and unity between her and the community. Amara's actions showed that courage and compassion were inseparable, and that one person's dedication could inspire an entire town. Elias watched proudly as Amara coordinated the relief efforts. He knew that the young woman who had once been at the mercy of the mob had grown into a strong, independent, and influential figure. She had not only survived adversity, but had transformed it into a force for good. Together, they worked tirelessly, side by side, demonstrating what could be achieved when people acted with integrity, cooperation, and empathy. Amara's reputation as a courageous and reliable member of the town was now firmly established, and the respect she had earned was lasting. Over time, Amara also became a symbol of hope and justice beyond Red Hollow. Travelers passing through the town would hear her story, how she had been saved from unjust punishment by Elias, and how she had gone on to contribute meaningfully to the community. People admired her resilience, her ability to forgive, and her commitment to helping others. Her story inspired many to reflect on their own judgments and to embrace courage and compassion in their own lives. Amara had become more than just a resident of Red Hollow. She had become a living example of the power of bravery, patience, and kindness. Despite all her achievements, Amara remained humble. She never sought recognition or praise for her deeds. She continued to work diligently, help others, and live her life with integrity. Her focus was always on building meaningful relationships, supporting the town, and creating a sense of belonging for everyone, especially those who felt different or unwelcome. Her actions were consistent and heartfelt, demonstrating that true respect and influence come from selfless dedication rather than the desire for acknowledgement. As the years went by, the town itself began to transform. People learned to see beyond superficial differences, to recognize the value in each individual, and to prioritize justice and compassion over fear and prejudice. Amara's influence played a central role in this change. She had faced the worst of human judgment and survived, and through her courage and consistent kindness, she had helped reshape the community's values. The town that had once been suspicious and fearful was now more open, understanding, and united. Amara's presence had left a lasting mark, a legacy of hope, resilience, and human decency. In her quieter moments, Amara would reflect on her journey. She remembered the fear she had faced, the rope that had nearly ended her life, and the courage of Elias that had saved her. She thought about the countless small acts of kindness and understanding she had witnessed and performed since then. She realized that life's true victories were not always the grand gestures, but the steady accumulation of goodwill, courage, and compassion over time. Each act, however small, contributed to a life lived with purpose and a community transformed by love and respect. Elias remained a constant presence in her life, a reminder that standing up for what is right can change the course of events for countless people. Together they celebrated successes, faced challenges, and shared quiet moments of reflection. Their bond, forged in moments of crisis and strengthened by years of shared work and understanding, became an example of trust, respect, and loyalty. Amara understood that her life had been profoundly changed, not just by her own courage, but also by the courage of those who had stood for justice beside her. One crisp autumn evening, as the sun set behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple, Amara walked through the town square. She paused for a moment to watch children play, neighbors greet each other, and the familiar rhythm of daily life continue. She felt a deep sense of fulfillment and belonging. Red Hollow had become her home, a place where she was accepted, respected, and loved. The fear and prejudice that had once threatened her life were now replaced by trust, kindness, and understanding. She had survived, thrived, and left a legacy that would endure. Amara's story became a lesson for the town and beyond. That courage can save lives, that compassion can heal hearts, and that one person's integrity and perseverance can change the world around them. Her journey from being judged and nearly executed to being respected and celebrated was a testament to the strength of the human spirit. She had faced darkness and emerged into the light, not alone, but with allies who shared her belief in justice and goodness. And in doing so, she inspired others to stand against fear and prejudice and to embrace courage, kindness, and empathy in their own lives. As she settled in for the night, the cool breeze drifting through the fields and the soft sounds of the ranch around her, Amara reflected on her life. She thought about the people who had doubted her, the ones who had feared her, and the ones who had supported her. She felt gratitude for Elias, for the young girl who had reached out to her, and for the many townspeople who had slowly come to accept and respect her. She understood that belonging was not just a matter of place, but a matter of action, courage, and heart. And she knew that she had found both, a home and a community that she had helped shape into something better. Amara drifted to sleep with peace in her heart, knowing that her journey had not only saved her life, but had also left an enduring mark on Red Hollow. Her story would be remembered for generations, a reminder that courage, kindness, and perseverance can triumph over fear, prejudice, and hatred. And in that quiet, star-filled night, the town rested too, safer, stronger, and more united because of the young woman who had arrived as a stranger, survived injustice, and built a life of respect, love, and hope.